For the African fish eagle, one day begins much like another. Just before dawn, it leaves the branch where it spent the night to fly to its lookout post. And there it spends about 90% of the day, its eyes glued to the water's surface. These great birds of prey live in couples and are found all over sub-Saharan Africa. You might say it's the lord of the winged wildlife of the African continent. Once the eagle-eyed hunter has spotted a victim and starts to swoop, there's little hope for its prey. 2 times out of 3 it will catch its fish. The African fish eagle can capture fish that weigh up to half its weight. But they're not the ideal prey. If the fish is too heavy, it cannot fly it back up to its branch. Instead, it has to haul it onto the bank and eat it on the ground, which it would rather avoid. It knows that on the ground it has one rival in particular that will fight it for its catch. That rival is another bird, only a heron perhaps, but a Goliath heron, the largest heron in the world. Africa is home to a whole host of remarkable birds. They come in all sizes and colors and are found in every conceivable habitat. Each one has found an environment to suit its taste. The mouse bird likes thinly wooded lands. The roller prefers the savannah, while the white-headed plover makes do with a lakeside rock. In some regions, the variety and concentration of different species is quite phenomenal. In eastern Africa, more than 1,200 different species have been spotted around the equator. By way of comparison, that's 350 more than in the United States, Canada and Mexico together, although they cover an area 35 times larger. If the African continent houses such a wide variety of bird life, it's because it still has vast expanses of unspoiled nature. Whatever their tastes and habits, birds find somewhere to nest and plenty to eat. This female cardinal woodpecker drums on the bark to drive out the grubs and insects it thrives on. The bee-eater has a different technique, attacking insects in flight. Each has its own technique and preferences. Fruit-eating birds can eat to their heart's content. The hornbill always plays a little game, picking the fruit and then throwing it up in the air before gulping it down. It's always lunchtime here, and nature's generosity knows no bounds. The yellow white-eye, which looks as if it's wearing glasses, can fully indulge its insatiable appetite for nectar. This abundance of food and the temperate climate are well known to birds the world over. The reputation of the African continent has reached far beyond its boundaries. When winter comes in the northern hemisphere, the number of birds in Africa suddenly soars. Hundreds of species arrive there from the far-off lands where they spend the rest of the year. This seasonal invasion is one of nature's most extraordinary phenomena. Even today it's shrouded in mystery. They come from Europe and Asia. It's believed that they began migrating to Africa at the start of the Tertiary era, and that the habit was confirmed much later in the Quaternary, during the periods of glaciation. The birds that lived in northern climes were forced to migrate south to Africa to flee the advancing cold. Between the ice ages, as the cold retreated northwards, the birds returned to their homes. More than 6,000 million birds set out on the great round trip every year, and millions of them never make it. Of all the birds that migrate to Africa every year, the white stork is one of the biggest and most spectacular. About 400,000 storks are thought to make the journey every year. Whether they go via the Straits of Gibraltar or via the Bosphorus depends on whether they come from Asia or Europe, but their paths meet up over Sudan and they carry on together to the equator. The migration route is almost always the same, although storks are always willing to make a small detour to follow a cloud of locusts, which is rather like a food-on-the-wing service. When they reach their destination, the migrants mingle with the sedentary species and share their food. Sometimes in the same species, some members migrate, while others stay put. Egrets are one example. The differences in this family of white herons are subtle. You can tell the great white egret by its yellow bill and the way it stalks its prey. The similar-looking little egret is smaller with a black bill, but above all it has another fishing technique. It chases the fish and catches it in motion. When they arrive in Africa, most migratory birds settle down in watery habitats. They colonize the swamps, mangroves, and riverbanks. For these seasonal visitors, this is a reassuring environment, not too different from what they're used to back home. It sometimes means slight changes to their diet. In the mangrove swamp, the curlew tries its hand at crab fishing. The herons and terns mingle with the African species of blacksmith plovers and African skimmers. This misshapen bird has tiny legs, wings which stick out behind, and above all a strange bill with a lower mandible much larger than the upper one. It uses it as a scoop to catch fish as it skims low over the water. There's virtually no communication between this open environment and the dense forest nearby. The river birds never venture into the forest. They would never survive. And vice versa. The forest has its specialists, like these turacos. These birds are poor flyers. They can just about glide from one tree to another. But in spite of their large size, there's nothing to match them when it comes to moving about in the dense vegetation. The blue plantain eater jumps tirelessly from branch to branch in search of fruits and seeds. There are other smaller species of turacos, but they're just as colourful. This is a Hartlaub's turaco, and this one a Livingstone's turaco. These birds owe their colouring to some very strange types of pigment that are soluble in alkaline water. It's said that if they get caught in the rain, their colours will wash out. That's why they never venture outside the forest to the open country where the swallows flit to and fro over the grassy plains. It's hard to go hungry in these waterlogged grasslands. The ibises are there. They thrive on insects and all sorts of invertebrates. The members of the ibis family have a downturned bill which they use as a kind of pick. This one is a Hadada ibis. They're found only in Africa. The Hadada ibis has a white mark on its cheek which makes it easy to distinguish from the glossy ibis, in spite of the resemblance between them. The easiest way to recognize them is to listen to their call. In the morning, the Hadada ibis gives out a characteristic cry before leaving the tree home where it lives with its mate during the mating season. The glossy ibis is smaller, and although it's very present in Africa, it's also found on every other continent. Its diet is made up of small animals, insects, but also worms, mollusks, and frogs. You often see them in the company of a large black and white ibis that the Egyptians considered to be a holy bird. For some unknown reason, the sacred ibis has mysteriously disappeared from Egypt, but it's still found all over sub-Saharan Africa except in Namibia. Ibis also have their rarer cousins. This bald ibis is now found only in a small region of Southeast Africa. It's a symbol of fertility, but it's also one of the most endangered species in the world. Surprisingly, when scientists began to discover and list the birds of Africa, they classified this large wader in the ibis family. The mistake has since been corrected, and the bird is called a yellow-billed stork. It is indeed a large stork which fishes blind in muddy waters. It detects its prey by touch, thanks to the touch-sensitive corpuscles on its bill. The bill is the weapon, the tool that makes all the difference and enables each species to make the most of its environment. Nature endowed these small stork with a strange bill that gave them their name, the open-bill stork. Unfortunately for them, they're the only stork whose flesh men like to eat, and many have fallen prey to hunters. However many there may be in a colony, they're never noisy, for these birds are perfectly mute. They're unable to sing or call. All they can do is rattle their bills. Open-billed storks live exclusively in wet environments where they're most likely to find mollusks and snails and make the most of their anatomical peculiarity, a bill the two halves of which meet only at the tip, leaving a small open space along the rest of its length. The stork's bill is a real multi-purpose tool. They use it to break snails open, spear mollusks, split shellfish in two. The hardest part is finding the prey in the first place. The open-billed stork often spends long moments prodding around in the shallow water to no avail. Nearby, a black crake is hunting with other means and rather more success. Different species exploit the same environment. Apart from a little squabbling over pecking order, this rarely causes problems. The hammerkop just moves down a branch. This small heron with its large anvil-shaped head is also happy on marshlands and riverbanks. It's an affable creature that doesn't mind sharing its small territory, a mile or two of river, with other fish-eating birds. Competition between birds in the same environment is limited quite naturally by the morphological differences between the species. The black-headed heron is built to explore deeper waters than the hammerkop. Each environment can sustain a large variety of species as long as they're sufficiently different to exploit the same ecosystem in a complementary manner. These birds also fish. In fact, they're no doubt the best and most skillful at it, but they attack from the air and can strike anywhere along the river. There are several species of kingfisher in Africa. This one is a malachite kingfisher. And here we have a grey-headed kingfisher. The largest member of the family is the giant kingfisher. The giant kingfisher is the largest of all the African kingfishers. It measures more than 16 inches. This one is smaller. It's a pied kingfisher. Where the water is clogged up with vegetation, it's a job for the specialists. Birds that operate in this environment are more exposed than elsewhere, and it's harder for them to spot their prey. But on the other hand, they have less competition. The squacco heron does quite well for itself among the thick vegetation, but the undisputed champions in this environment are those birds that are able to walk on the water, thanks to some surprising transformations. The jasina, or lilyhopper, has developed such long toes that it almost looks deformed. And what evolutionary need could possibly have led this bird to develop such a large bill so high on its head, with this monstrous result? The shoebill stork is a rare bird in more ways than one. It's found only in a few isolated marshlands of Uganda and western Tanzania. The bird's bill has a hook on it which it uses to capture fish and frogs with diabolical dexterity. There's more to the shoebill stork than meets the eye. In spite of its heavy, ungainly appearance, it takes to the air with the greatest of ease. In flight, it uses its 8-foot wingspan to glide on the hot air currents. This almost prehistoric-looking bird is one of the rarest in Africa, where it survives as best it can, far from all human presence. It's a bird that nests on the ground, where it's all the more exposed to predators and poachers. The best thing for a bird, whenever it can, is to stay well off the ground. The top of a bush or the top of a tree, it can be a safety measure as well as a strategic move in some cases. These cliffs are home to some Ruppel's vultures. There's no question of their limiting themselves to this observation post to spot their prey. Every morning they must set off in search of food. These birds, which can have a wingspan of 8 feet, think nothing of traveling 60 miles to find a carcass. Vultures are fast flyers. They head for their hunting ground at speeds of over 40 miles an hour. The Ruppel's vulture can rise to amazing heights. It has been spotted at altitudes of 36,000 feet, which makes it the all-round champion of the animal kingdom. Most of the time, though, it glides around in wide circles at a height of about 1,000 feet. This ritual never fails to attract the hyenas. They use this aerial signal to locate dead animals. As vultures are no match for hyenas, the only way for the vulture to win is to beat the hyena to it. The claws of these great birds are not strong enough to carry off even a piece of carcass, so they have to eat it on the spot. All they need is just a small head start over the hyenas, because it only takes them a few minutes to eat their fill. A Ruppel's vulture weighs about 16 pounds and can ingurgitate just over 3 pounds of meat. Then it stays around nearby to digest its meal, as it's quite unable to take off again. There are several species of vultures. They all play a sanitary role that's vital to the natural equilibrium of the savannah, even if their diet of dead animals is less prestigious than that of the true hunters. Perched high in the treetops, they save their energy and survey their hunting ground. Dozens of pairs of hawk eyes just waiting for an unsuspecting victim. They each have their speciality. They're all there. The Vero's eagle, the long-crested eagle, the battleur, the martial eagle, which is the same size as the African fish eagle, leaves the small fry to those smaller than itself. This black kite has caught a mouse and deals it the coup de grace with its beak in full flight. This life or death relationship concerns only a small number of birds and mammals. Most of the time, the beasts of the earth and the birds of the air take no notice of one another, or even do each other favors. One type of bird is specialized in assistance to mammals, the oxpecker or tick bird. Its strong claws enable it to cling in almost any position, even to slippery surfaces. The oxpecker has an insatiable appetite for ticks, and it's only too pleased to rid hippos, rhinos and giraffes of their parasites. These herbivorous creatures appreciate the service all the more as the birds work on areas they cannot reach with their tongues. The oxpecker's menu consists mainly of ticks full of blood. Their sharp, pointed beaks are the perfect tool for scouring their host's fur. In an average day, an oxpecker can eat about 400 ticks. As there are probably about 50,000 ticks on an adult giraffe, it's not unusual to see several birds squatting the same host. There's virtually no risk to the birds who get so close to these large mammals. A simple beat of the wings will take them instantly out of reach of a flick of a trunk or an unfriendly bite. As the mammals know this, they let the birds get on with it. Except for species like the black-bellied bustard, which are terrestrial birds. These birds cannot perch because they have no rear claw to grip with. The vulturine guinea fowl is no better off. It's the most elegant of guinea fowls, and although it spends the night perched out of harm's way, it exposes itself to great danger rummaging around in the grass for food. These birds regularly make a tasty snack for a jackal or a cheetah. What really distinguishes birds from land animals is their ability to fly. But although the ostrich is a bird with feathers to prove it, it has little else in common with the other birds. Officially, the ostrich is the largest bird in the world, weighing in at over 300 pounds, with huge feet and massive thighs which are all blue in this male Somalian ostrich. There are two subspecies of ostrich. In both the Maasai ostrich and the Somalian ostrich, the male has the most spectacular plumage, while the female bird is smaller and duller in color. What they all desperately lack is the power to escape in 3 dimensions. So they're constantly on the alert, worried not so much for themselves as for their young. Ostriches have between 3 and 8 chicks at a time, and some of them invariably end up in the jaws of a big cat. The lifestyle of the ostrich is more like that of a herbivore than of any other bird. Like all herbivores, it spends all day eating. Its elastic gullet can swallow just about anything, and its diet is very varied. Grass, roots, leaves and fruit. But it also catches insects and occasionally hunts small rodents and lizards. Considering its weight, the ostrich has a fairly moderate appetite. It eats 6 or 7 pounds of food a day and makes do with the water contained in its food. While they're feeding, one ostrich always stands guard. With its sharp eyesight and its head perched 7 feet off the ground, it's the second natural watchtower of the savannah, just after the giraffe. From time to time, the ostrich beats its wings rather half-heartedly. Then it really takes itself for a bird and starts preening its feathers, just like any other bird. This is the main pastime of most birds. When they're not eating, they're always preening their feathers. For these are the key to their magic, the power to fly. Ideally, their wash and brush up should always begin with a bath. This superb starling is sopping wet. It has just had a bath by splashing water all over itself. Now it must dry itself and put its feathers in order. Like this white-bellied go-away bird, all birds check their feathers one by one and put them carefully back in place. It's a time-consuming job. They take each feather in their beak, starting at the base. The idea is to get rid of any parasites and dirt and to rearrange their plumage. This self-indulgence, although necessary, can have fatal consequences. By preening itself, the red and yellow barbet draws the attention of the Maasai hunters to its finely colored plumage, and they regularly hunt it to use its feathers for their ceremonial dress. Then there's one last operation before the wash and brush up is complete. It consists in covering the feathers with an oily liquid secreted by a gland at the base of the tail. This gland is something the ostrich does not have, nor does another large bird you occasionally see in the savannah, the cory bustard. It's the largest bustard of all, well over 3 feet high. It doesn't look particularly large, but unlike most birds, which look bigger than they are because of the volume of their feathers, the bustard has a massive body. Although it can weigh up to 40 pounds and more, the cory bustard can actually take off. It's the heaviest flying bird in the world. But the bustard never flies great distances. In fact, it prefers to walk. If it takes to the air sometimes, it's as if to reassure itself that it does belong to the same world as the winged creatures that surround it. This is the real heavyweight of the African skies. It can fly for miles and miles. There's no doubt about it, with a wingspan of up to 12 feet, the white pelican is one of Africa's largest birds. It's a very sociable bird and often lives in the midst of other species. The origins of this unusual bird go back a very long way. Its ancestors appeared 100 million years ago. These birds live in colonies with no hierarchy and are considered primitive but endowed with some highly advanced natural devices. When it gets too hot, the pelican just has to puff out the huge pouch that hangs from its lower mandible to cool down. When it shakes it, the blood in the bloodstream cools on contact with the air and maintains the bird's temperature steady. The elephant's huge ears serve the same temperature control function. The pouch also has other uses, of course. It's also a holdall and a fishing net. Pelicans are very buoyant creatures, hardly sinking at all, in spite of their stocky stature and the fact that they weigh over 20 pounds. Even without their feathers, pelicans should be much heavier considering their size. But their morphology is specially designed for lightness. Their bones are hollow and their structure complex to combine lightness and solidity. The skeleton accounts for no more than 10% of the pelican's total weight. Along with the heron, the pelican is the only bird that flies with its neck tucked in. It helps reduce the weight of its head and its huge bill. They fly in formation so that each pelican is flying in the slipstream of the one ahead, which requires less effort. The leader regularly drops out and another bird takes its turn to lead the formation. There are two kinds of pelican in Africa. The white pelicans are the largest. They always fish in groups and nest on the ground. It can be hard to tell them apart from the grey pelicans with which they sometimes live. But their habits are different. The grey pelican fishes solo and prefers to nest in the treetops. In nesting high off the ground, grey pelicans protect their young from predators. But there's always a danger that they'll fall out of the tree, which indeed they often do. Whatever the species, newly hatched chicks are always extremely vulnerable. In the first days of their life, they run a gauntlet of dangers. This baby Verreaux's eagle owl is only a few days old. The adult watching over it is a very large owl capable of protecting it from most predators. But the safest bet is to have a well-designed, well-concealed nest. You have to think of everything. It must be out of reach of predators and capable of withstanding all sorts of weather. The Verreaux's eagle owl tends to trust in the skills of others. It often nests in a large nest that has been abandoned by some bird of prey or a hammerkop. The hammerkop's nest is a good example of the fantasy of it all. Small as it is, this little stork builds a gigantic nest 5 feet in diameter, which takes 2 adult birds all of 6 weeks' work. Building nests is a bird's great mission in life, and they tackle it with great energy and dedication. Each species has its technique, but Africa's greatest craftsman in the art of nest building is certainly the weaver bird. There are dozens of different species of weaver. Among birds, the physical difference between males and females is quite striking. The male has the most colourful plumage. For the weaver bird, the mating season begins at the beginning of the rainy season. That's when the male finds the soft green grass it uses to build its home. The nests are always built according to the same principle, using the same method. The bird starts by choosing a branch and carefully weaving the first strands of the nest. As the work progresses, a sort of ring appears, which will serve as a trapeze for the bird to hang on as it continues building. Gradually, the weaver bird weaves more grass into the nest. It's particularly careful when it gets to the roof of the nest, which has to be perfectly watertight to protect the mother and her young from even the heaviest downpours. Little by little, you see hundreds of nests appearing in the savannah. Each nest reveals the identity of the species that built it and the state of the vegetation. This red-headed weaver is all excited at having finished its nest. It hopes its work will meet with the approval of a female of the species. It struts about, calling out that everything's ready. If a female goes into the nest, all is well. Whatever the technique used and the shape of the nest, whatever the species concerned, the purpose is always to offer shelter to the young, as close as possible to a supply of food. The African darter, a sort of African cormorant, always builds its nest over a river, which avoids too much coming and going to feed its chicks. With a pointed beak and streamlined shape, the darter is an elegant bird that flies like a dart, hence its name. The African darter feeds its young for the first 50 days of their existence. For the marabou stork, this feeding phase lasts much longer. This large, bald stork, which is widespread in Africa today, was rare in the east of the continent until the early 20th century. It has prospered there since then, feeding in particular on the animal remains left by human activities. Marabou stork are rarely seen alone. They nest in colonies, with scores of couples invading each tree. The nest was built by both parents, but each played a different role. The male did the fetching and the female the building. Now they look after their young together. Never more than 2 or 3 chicks hatch at a time. Feeding time is always at the same hour, in the middle of the day. It takes the ungainly chicks about 3.5 months to turn into young birds, which are just as ungainly, but able to fly. In the bird world, mother and father both contribute to the upbringing of their young. This saddle-billed stork, another great African stork, is impatiently awaited by its young. It has just been fishing and is about to regurgitate a fish for each of them. The saddle-billed stork is very jealous of its territory, to the point that when its own young grow a little older, it will chase them away quite mercilessly. In the meantime, however, it's a devoted parent, very concerned about their education. Perhaps in bringing back this branch, it's already teaching them about the large nest they'll have to build one day. While the young of the saddle-billed stork in no way resemble their parents, the parents themselves look remarkably alike. There's only one way to tell them apart, and that's by the color of their eyes. The female has yellow eyes. So this one with the black eyes must be the father. There are no half measures with birds. Either they're spectacularly different, or it's virtually impossible to distinguish between the sexes. In the crowned crane, the only difference lies in the crest, which is slightly larger in the male. Even during the mating ritual, both birds take turns to dance, and it's hard to tell which is trying to seduce the other. Cranes are monogamous birds and are thought to stay together for life. Relationships between birds of opposite sexes tend to last longer than those between mammals. Their union is often more than a mere attachment to a territory or to a brood of chicks. The Fisher's lovebirds, which are found only on the high plateaus of Tanzania, have become the symbol of this lasting union in the bird world. In some species, couples delouse each other. When one bird cleans another's feathers, it's a sign of affection. This is a common practice in the hornbill family, and hornbills are models of matrimonial fidelity. When a couple forms, it does so for life. These are silvery-cheeked hornbills. The whole hornbill family is quite original and spectacular, but the most surprising of all is the ground hornbill, a huge terrestrial specimen. You can tell the male from the female by the color of the crop hanging under its bill. The male's is red and the female's blue. Hornbills are highly representative of the birds of the African continent, colored and striking with their helmets or their huge bills. Depending on the species, birds can thrive in the forest or in the grasslands, on the fruits of the trees or the riches of the earth, always making the most of this generous land of Africa. There are just over 9,000 species of birds in the world today. 6,000 of them, or 2 out of 3, are in danger, threatened by change and the disappearance of their habitats. Still, in spite of its rapidly expanding population and uncontrolled deforestation, the African continent is still a paradise for the birds of the air. It offers not only vast expanses of virgin territory, but also nature parks where wildlife is protected. They make real survival zones for those species in need of protection. When threatened or in danger, birds can take refuge there far more easily than mammals. There are no obstacles or fences to hinder them, no farmlands or villages to avoid. All it takes is a few beats of the wings to fly them to safety.